What happens when one of Hollywood's most intense, no-nonsense actors walks onto a daytime talk show expecting a straightforward interview, but instead finds himself in a conversation that slowly turns tense, personal, and impossible to ignore? Make sure to subscribe to Talk Show Fallout and like and comment for more talk show coverage. The audience is already clapping as Russell Crowe walks out onto the stage. He gives a polite smile, a small wave, not overly energetic but respectful. You can tell right away, he's calm, composed, maybe even slightly reserved. He shakes hands with the hosts, nods to a few audience members, and takes his seat at the table. Whoopi Goldberg leans back slightly in her chair, smiling in that familiar, relaxed way she has when welcoming guests. "Russell Crowe, everybody," she says, gesturing toward him as the applause continues for a few seconds longer before fading out. "Thanks for being here," she adds. Russell nods. "Thanks for having me. Appreciate it." Joy Behar jumps in quickly, leaning forward. "You've been busy. I mean, it feels like every year there's something new from you. Do you ever slow down?" Russell gives a small chuckle. "I try to. Doesn't always work out that way." Light laughter from the audience. Sunny Hostin looks down at her notes, then back up. "Your latest project. People are calling it one of your most intense roles in years. What drew you to it?" Russell shifts slightly in his seat. "Honestly, it was the story. It felt grounded. Real. Not trying too hard to be something it's not." Whoopi nods. "We like real here," she says casually. There's a comfortable rhythm at first. The conversation flows easily. Talk about the film, his preparation, even a brief moment where Sarah Haynes asks about how he balances work and personal life. Russell answers thoughtfully, not overly talkative but engaged. "I think as you get older," he says, "you start choosing things that matter a bit more. Not just work for the sake of work." The audience murmurs in agreement. Whoopi tilts her head slightly. "That's interesting," she says. "Because some people would say you've always chosen intense roles, sometimes controversial ones." Russell glances at her, still calm. "Controversial how?" There's a subtle shift in tone. It's small but noticeable. Whoopi shrugs lightly. "Well, characters that spark conversation. Not always easy topics." Russell nods slowly. "I think that's part of storytelling. You're not always supposed to be comfortable." Sunny leans in. "But do you think there's a responsibility there? Especially now, with how audiences react to certain themes." Russell pauses for a moment. Not long, but just enough to feel like he's choosing his words carefully. "There's always responsibility," he says. "But I don't think the answer is to avoid difficult stories." The audience claps lightly. Joy jumps in. "Right, but there's a difference between difficult and divisive, right?" Russell turns slightly toward her. "Depends on who decides what's divisive." A few audience members react with a soft, "Oh," sensing the conversation beginning to sharpen. Whoopi leans forward now, her tone still calm but more focused. "Well, the audience decides, don't they? I mean, people respond based on what they see and how it affects them." Russell nods. "Sure. But that doesn't mean you stop telling certain stories just because they make people uncomfortable." Sunny raises an eyebrow. "But what if that discomfort comes from something deeper? Like representation or how certain groups are portrayed?" There's a brief silence. Russell exhales slightly. "Then you listen. But listening doesn't mean you automatically agree with every criticism." The audience reaction is mixed, some clapping, some quiet. Whoopi watches him closely. "So you don't think actors should adjust based on that feedback?" Russell looks directly at her now. "I think actors should think for themselves." That line lands heavier than the others. You can feel it in the room. Whoopi smiles, but it's a different kind of smile now. Less casual, more measured. "Well, that's fair," she says. "But you're also part of an industry that shapes how people see the world." Russell nods again, slower this time. "And I take that seriously. But I don't think the solution is to start filtering everything through fear." A few audience members clap again, louder this time. Joy glances between them. "Okay, but nobody's saying fear," she says. "We're talking about awareness." Russell turns toward her. "Awareness is important. But so is honesty." Sunny interjects, her tone sharpening just slightly. "But whose honesty? That's the question." There it is. The first real moment of tension. Russell leans back a bit, folding his hands together. "Well, ideally your own." The audience reacts again, this time more divided. Whoopi tilts her head. "But what if your own perspective ignores someone else's experience?" Russell doesn't answer immediately. And that pause, this time it's longer. You can feel the shift more clearly now. What started as a standard interview is slowly turning into something more layered, more personal. Russell finally speaks. I don't think it's about ignoring, he says. I think it's about not pretending to understand something you don't fully understand. The audience quiets down. Whoopi watches him closely, then leans in just a bit more. But isn't that exactly why people are asking for more awareness? She says. So you do try to understand? There's a slight edge in her voice now. Russell notices it. Everyone does. And for the first time since he sat down, his expression shifts, not dramatically, but enough. More serious. Less relaxed. I think there's a difference, he says, his voice a little firmer now, between trying to understand and being told what you're allowed to say. A louder reaction from the audience this time. Some applause, some gasps. Joy looks at Whoopi. Sunny sits back slightly, watching closely. Whoopi doesn't smile now. She just looks at him. And the energy at the table? It's no longer casual. It's building. The moment hangs in the air for a second longer than usual, and you can feel that the energy at the table has shifted from casual conversation into something more serious. Something that both the hosts and Russell Crowe are now fully aware of. Whoopi doesn't jump in right away this time. She lets that last comment sit. Then she folds her hands on the table and looks directly at him. Well, she says, her tone calm but firmer now. Nobody's telling you what you're allowed to say. But people are reacting to what you do say. That's part of the deal. Russell nods once, but his expression stays serious. Of course they are. And they should. I'm not saying people shouldn't react. I'm saying that reaction shouldn't turn into pressure to conform. A few audience members clap again, this time louder, but it's mixed with a noticeable murmur across the studio. Sunny leans forward, clearly engaged now. But what you're calling pressure, some people would call accountability. Russell turns toward her. Accountability for what exactly? Sunny doesn't hesitate. For how your work impacts people. For the messages it sends, whether intentional or not. Russell gives a slight exhale through his nose, not quite a sigh, but close. I understand that argument, he says. I really do. But I think there's a line where accountability becomes expectation, and expectation becomes limitation. Joy raises her eyebrows. Limitation of what? Of saying something offensive? She asks, half smiling but clearly pushing. A ripple of laughter moves through the audience. Russell doesn't smile back this time. Limitation of being honest, he replies. That lands harder. The audience quiets again, more noticeably this time. Whoopi tilts her head slightly, her voice still controlled but more pointed. But honesty doesn't exist in a vacuum, she says. You're not just talking to yourself, you're talking to millions of people. Russell nods. I'm aware of that. So then, Whoopi continues, why push back so hard against the idea that those millions of people might want you to be more mindful of what you're putting out there? Russell shifts in his seat again, leaning slightly forward now, matching her energy. Because, he says, being mindful has started to mean something very specific and very narrow. The audience reacts again, this time louder, more divided. Some claps, some audible disagreement. Sunny shakes her head slightly. Or maybe it just means being respectful. Russell turns to her again, his tone still controlled but firmer than before. Respect goes both ways. That line gets a louder reaction. Some applause, some sounds from the crowd. Joy jumps in quickly, sensing the escalation. Okay, but let's not pretend that all criticism is unfair, she says. Sometimes people are calling things out for a reason. Russell nods. Absolutely. And sometimes they're not. There's a slight tension in the way he says it, just enough to shift the room again. Whoopi leans back slightly, crossing her arms loosely. So how do you decide which is which? She asks. Russell looks at her directly. You listen. You think. And then you decide for yourself. Sunny lets out a small breath, almost a laugh, but not quite amused. That sounds nice in theory, she says. But in reality, that can also mean ignoring valid criticism. Russell's jaw tightens slightly. It's subtle but visible. No, he says. It means not automatically accepting every criticism as valid just because it's loud. That line hits. The audience reacts more strongly now, clear division. Some people clap loudly, others shake their heads. Whoopi raises a hand slightly, signaling for the audience to settle. Okay, she says. Let's bring it back for a second. But she doesn't fully pull it back. Instead, she leans in again. Do you think, she says carefully, that part of the issue here is that people in your position aren't always used to being challenged in this way? There's a noticeable reaction from the audience, some gasps, some claps. That question lands differently. More personal. Russell pauses again, but this time the pause feels heavier. When he speaks, his tone is more direct. I've been challenged my entire career, he says. That's not new. Whoopi nods. Sure, but the kind of challenge has changed. Russell tilts his head slightly. Has it? Or is it just louder now? A few audience members react with a mix of laughter and applause. Sunny leans in again, more assertive now. It's not just louder, she says. It's more informed. People have more access, more awareness. Russell cuts in, not loudly but firmly. And that's a good thing. There's a brief pause, because that's not the response they expected. Sunny blinks slightly. Okay, then what's the problem? Russell leans forward, his voice steady but more intense now. The problem, he says, is when that awareness turns into assumption. The room quiets again. Joy looks at him. Assumption about what? About intent, Russell says. About meaning. About who someone is based on one thing they said or one role they played. Whoopi watches him closely. But you understand why people do that, right? Russell nods. I understand it. I don't agree with it. That clear, direct line creates another ripple through the audience. This time, the tension is undeniable. Sunny crosses her arms slightly. So what's the alternative? She asks. Just let everything slide? Russell shakes his head. No. The alternative is conversation. Real conversation. Not immediate judgment. Whoopi gestures lightly with her hand. But this is a conversation, she says. Russell looks at her. And for a brief second, there's a flicker of something sharper in his expression. Yes, he says. It is. That tone doesn't go unnoticed. The audience picks up on it instantly. Joy glances at Whoopi, then back at Russell. It sounds like you feel like people aren't giving you that space, she says. Russell pauses. Then he nods slowly. Sometimes they're not. The room goes quieter than it has been since the segment started. Whoopi leans forward again, her voice now more direct than at any point so far. Or, she says, sometimes they are, and you just don't like what they're saying. That line lands like a spark. A louder reaction from the audience, gasps, claps, a few scattered, oh, sounds. Russell's expression changes again, this time more visibly. His posture straightens. His jaw tightens just slightly more. And when he speaks, his voice carries a different weight. That's not it, he says. Short. Firm. Whoopi holds his gaze. Then what is it? She asks. And now there's no easing back. The conversation has fully crossed into confrontation territory. The kind that doesn't resolve quickly. The kind that keeps building. The air in the studio feels tighter now, like everyone, hosts, audience, even the crew behind the cameras, knows this is no longer just a spirited discussion. It's something more direct, more personal, and neither side is stepping away from it. Russell doesn't answer immediately. He looks at Whoopi for a moment, then glances briefly down at the table, almost like he's deciding how far he wants to go with this. When he looks back up, his voice is steady, but there's a clear edge to it now. What it is, he says, is that there's an assumption that disagreement equals disrespect. And I don't agree with that. A few people in the audience clap. But it's more cautious this time. Whoopi nods slowly, but her expression doesn't soften. But sometimes, she says, it is disrespect. That's what people are reacting to. Russell leans forward slightly. And sometimes, he replies, people project disrespect where there isn't any. That line gets a louder reaction, more divided than anything before. Sunny shakes her head again. But you don't get to decide that for everyone else, she says. If someone feels disrespected, that's real. Russell turns toward her, his tone controlled but noticeably firmer. Of course it's real to them. I'm not denying that. But that doesn't automatically make the intention disrespectful. Joy raises her hand slightly, trying to mediate. Okay, but intention versus impact. That's been the whole conversation for years now, she says. And impact matters. Russell nods. It does. But if we ignore intention completely, then we're not having a fair conversation anymore. Whoopi leans in again, her voice sharper now. Fair for who? That question lands hard. Russell meets her gaze immediately this time. For everyone, he says. Whoopi gives a small, incredulous smile. That sounds nice, she says. But the reality is, it hasn't been fair for everyone. The audience reacts, louder agreement from one side. Russell doesn't pull back. And I'm not saying it has, he replies. But fixing that doesn't mean shutting down people who are trying to speak honestly. Sunny jumps in quickly. But again, you keep framing this as people being shut down, she says, when in reality, they're being challenged. Russell's voice tightens just slightly. There's a difference. Sunny responds immediately. Not always. That quick back and forth gets a strong reaction from the audience. This is the most intense exchange so far. Joy leans forward, trying to keep control of the table. Okay, let's slow it down a second, she says, half laughing but clearly aware of how heated it's getting. But Whoopi doesn't slow down. She keeps her eyes on Russell. You keep coming back to this idea, she says, that people are being silenced or limited. But you're here. You're speaking. No one's stopping you. Russell nods once. Here, yes. Whoopi catches that instantly. What does that mean? There's a pause. Russell exhales, then answers. It means, he says, that outside of spaces like this, the reaction isn't always conversation. It's labeling. It's assumptions. It's conclusions being drawn before you've even finished speaking. The audience quiets again, listening closely. Sunny leans back slightly, studying him. But that comes with being a public figure, she says. You know that. Russell nods. I do. Doesn't mean it's always right. Whoopi tilts her head. But it also doesn't mean it's always wrong. There's a beat. Russell's expression tightens more noticeably now. And when he speaks again, there's less restraint. That's exactly my point, he says. It's not always one thing or the other. But the way it's handled now, it's like there's no room for nuance. A few audience members clap again, louder. Sunny leans forward again, her tone more direct. Or maybe, she says, there is nuance, but people are tired of having to explain why something is harmful over and over again. That line hits hard. A strong reaction from the audience, clear support. Russell doesn't back off. I'm not asking anyone to explain anything over and over again, he says. I'm asking for the same space to respond without being immediately dismissed. Whoopi raises her eyebrows slightly. Dismissed? Or disagreed with? Russell looks at her, and this time there's no hesitation at all. Dismissed, he says. The firmness in his voice changes the energy again. Whoopi leans back slightly, crossing her arms now. That's a strong word. Russell nods. Because it's happening. Sunny shakes her head. Or maybe it feels that way because the criticism is stronger now, she says. Russell turns to her, his voice rising just a fraction. Not shouting, but clearly more intense. Or maybe it's because the conversation isn't balanced anymore. That line triggers the biggest reaction yet. Some applause, some loud disagreement. A few people talking over each other in the audience before it settles again. Joy steps in quickly. All right, we're getting into it now, she says, trying to keep things from spiraling too far. But the moment has already escalated. Whoopi leans forward again, her tone no longer casual at all. Balanced how? She asks. Russell doesn't hold back now. Balanced in the sense that not every disagreement should be treated like a problem that needs to be corrected, he says. Sometimes it's just a different perspective. Whoopi responds immediately. Unless that perspective causes harm. Russell's response comes just as quickly. And who decides that? There's a sharp reaction from the audience. Gasps, claps, overlapping voices. Whoopi answers without missing a beat. The people affected by it. Russell shakes his head slightly. That's one side of it. Sunny leans in again. It's the most important side. Russell turns toward her, and now his voice carries a clear frustration that wasn't there before. It's an important side, he says. But it's not the only side. That line pushes things right to the edge. The audience reaction is loud, divided, emotional. Whoopi doesn't smile now. She looks directly at him and says, more firmly than at any point so far, when you say that, it sounds like you're minimizing people's experiences. And that's the moment everything shifts. Because Russell reacts instantly. No, he says sharply. Not loud, but strong enough to cut through the noise. I'm not minimizing anything. The studio goes quiet again. Even the audience feels it. Russell leans forward now, his posture more rigid, his tone unmistakably intense. What I'm saying, he continues, is that you can acknowledge someone's experience without surrendering your own perspective completely. The tension is at its peak now. Whoopi holds his gaze. Sunny watches closely. Joy sits back slightly, eyes moving between them. No one interrupts. And for a brief moment, it feels like anything could be said next. Anything. And whatever it is, it's going to define the rest of this conversation. For a few seconds, no one speaks. It's that rare kind of silence you only get on live television, when the conversation has gone just far enough that everyone is aware of it, but no one is quite sure who's going to break it first. Russell is still leaning forward slightly, his hands now resting firmly on the table. His expression is set, focused, intense, but controlled. He's not backing down, but he's also not raising his voice. That restraint makes the moment feel even heavier. Whoopi finally exhales softly and leans back in her chair again. She uncrosses her arms, but her eyes stay locked on him. "Okay," she says, her tone measured. "Let's take a breath for a second." There's a light ripple of nervous laughter from the audience. More relief than humor. Joy nods quickly. "Yeah, I think we all need that," she adds, trying to ease the tension. Sunny adjusts in her seat, still watching Russell closely, but she doesn't jump in this time. Whoopi continues, calmer now but still firm. "Nobody here is saying you can't have your perspective," she says. "That's not what this is." Russell nods once. "I understand that." But, Whoopi adds, when you say things like, "it's not the only side," people hear that as you downplaying what they've experienced. Russell takes a second before responding. His tone is still serious, but slightly less sharp than before. "I hear that," he says. "And maybe that's where the disconnect is. Because from my side, I'm not trying to downplay anything. I'm trying to keep the conversation open." The audience is quieter now, listening instead of reacting. Sunny speaks again, but her tone has softened just a bit. "But do you see how that can come across differently?" she asks. "Especially to people who feel like their experiences haven't always been taken seriously?" Russell nods again, slower this time. "Yes," he says. "I do see that. That's the first moment of real de-escalation. You can feel it immediately." Joy leans in slightly, taking the opportunity. "Okay, so maybe that's the middle ground," she says, acknowledging that both things can exist at the same time. Whoopi glances at her, then back at Russell. "That's all anyone's really asking for," she says. Russell shifts back in his seat a little, the tension in his shoulders easing just slightly. "And I'm not against that," he replies. "I just think we've reached a point where people are afraid to even start the conversation." Sunny shakes her head gently. "Or they're just more careful," she says. Russell gives a small, restrained smile. Sometimes those two things feel the same. A few audience members laugh lightly. This time, the reaction is softer, less divided. Whoopi nods once. "Fair enough," she says. "But I think the goal is to get to a place where people can speak and listen. Not just one or the other." Russell nods. "Agreed." That word, simple, direct, lands differently after everything that's just happened. There's a brief pause again, but this time it's not tense. It's more like everyone is recalibrating. Joy claps her hands lightly. "Okay, we made it through that," she says with a half laugh. The audience laughs with her, this time genuinely. Whoopi allows herself a small smile. "These are the conversations people are having at home," she says. "So it's not a bad thing to have them here too." Russell nods. "I agree with that." Sunny adds, "As long as we keep them respectful." Russell looks at her and nods again. "Always." There's a brief moment of mutual acknowledgement, subtle, but real. And just like that, the intensity that built over the last several minutes begins to settle. Whoopi glances toward the camera. "We're going to take a quick break," she says in her usual hosting tone, but there's still a hint of what just happened lingering underneath. More with Russell Crowe when we come back. The audience applauds, loud, but mixed with the energy of everything they've just witnessed. The segment cuts to commercial. But the conversation doesn't end there. Clips from that exchange start circulating almost immediately. Within minutes, short videos begin appearing across platforms, some focusing on the moment Russell said, "Respect goes both ways," others highlighting Whoopi's line, the people affected by it. By the time the show finishes airing, it's already trending. Online, the reactions are split, just like the audience in the studio. Some people are praising Russell for standing his ground, saying he pushed back against what they see as unfair expectations. Others are backing Whoopi and the hosts, arguing that the questions were valid and necessary, and that the pushback only proved their point. Comment sections fill up fast. You could feel the tension through the screen. That wasn't just a debate, that got personal. Finally someone said it. No, he completely missed the point. Clips are replayed, analyzed, slowed down. Body language is dissected. Tone is debated. Even the pauses, the silences, become part of the conversation. By the next day, multiple media outlets are covering the moment. Headlines describe it as heated, intense, unexpected. Some call it one of the most uncomfortable segments the show has had in a while. Others call it one of the most honest. Behind the scenes, reports start to come out that the break after the segment was quieter than usual. Not hostile, but not casual either. Just thoughtful. When the show returned from commercial, the tone was noticeably lighter. The conversation shifted back to Russell's film, his career, a few lighter questions. But the earlier exchange wasn't ignored. It lingered in the way everyone spoke, a little more careful, a little more aware. And Russell himself? He stayed composed. Professional. Engaged, but slightly more reserved than when he first walked out. Whoopi kept things moving, as she always does. Sunny remained thoughtful, measured. Joy added moments of humor to keep things balanced. But that earlier conversation? It stayed with the audience. Because it felt real. Not scripted. Not polished. Just a moment where two very different perspectives met. Without fully agreeing, but without completely shutting each other down either. And that's what people kept coming back to. The fact that it didn't end in a clear win for either side. It just ended, with both sides still standing where they were. Still convinced of their point. But maybe, just slightly more aware of the other. And that's why it kept trending. Because it didn't feel like television. It felt like real life. So what do you think? Was Russell Crowe right to stand his ground? Or did Whoopi Goldberg and the hosts raise the points that needed to be said? Share your opinion in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to Talk Show Fallout for more real talk show stories.